Chapter 24. After another week in the hospital, Peter was back resting at his parents' house under a strict dialysis schedule and light-duty restriction. On that first morning home, Peter paced across his room constantly, checking his cell phone for a message from his dad, who was supposed to be talking to Father Raymond about his adoption. I just can't wait any longer or I'll lose my mind. He tossed his phone onto his bed and flopped down next to it, stretching out on his back, folding his arms behind his head. The crack near the ceiling caught his attention. He followed it as it drew a boundary in the light blue paint between the window and the closet, stopping at a photograph on the wall. It was a picture of Exa and him at Radio City Music Hall in New York City. It was right after they had finished playing an encore that night. I think I was maybe 14 in that picture. I was pretty short standing next to Exa. I'm taller than she is now. It really wasn't that long ago. My future was so promising back then. Now it's all a joke. He rolled onto his side so he didn't have to look at the picture of him smiling. That kid was a fool. He yawned. Oh, maybe it's my meds, but I'm exhausted. Peter closed his eyes and felt the muscles in his face relax. His breathing steadied as he fell asleep into a dream. It started with a bird's eye view of a dark, hollow room with bare walls and wooden floors that sat empty except for a small, white, rocking baby cradle in the middle of the room. His view zoomed in, and he saw a window open. The linen curtain danced in the breeze. The smell of fresh-cut grass wafted in through the window. Peter heard a baby cry. He looked around the room. He was now walking in the room with bare feet on the wood floor. The cries got louder and more intense, sparking a feeling of panic in Peter's chest as he searched for the noise. It was coming from the cradle, which now rocked back and forth on its own. Peter leaned over the cradle to pick up the baby to console it. But the cradle was empty. The cries got louder and more intense. The cradle rocked faster, but there was still no baby. Peter touched the cradle to try to stop it. Ouch! It burned Peter's hand. He jumped back, and he heard laughing. The wind gusted in from the window. The room started spinning as he backed away from the cradle towards the door. The wind blew harder, and it held Peter back. The room spun faster, and the door moved away from Peter. Peter pivoted to chase after the door, but the room spun even faster, and the door moved faster while the wind blew at him. Peter ran after the door, but he couldn't keep up. The laughter got louder, ringing of insanity. "I want out of here!" he cried out. A thundering sound shook the house, and everything stopped. It was silent. The dream continued, with a bright light shining through the window. The door blew open, and the goat woman emerged in the doorway. She was holding something. A baby. His mind slammed back into focus as he awoke. His stomach heaved in disgust as he focused on his breath. It was just a dream, he told himself as he sat straight up in bed. But it's not just a dream. There's something more. I just can't see it. He rubbed his head, but nothing came to him. It was blocked. He climbed out of bed and removed his sweat-soaked t-shirt. He replaced it with another identical gray t-shirt. I need answers now. He went to find his mom. Peter found Anne making coffee in the kitchen while the twins sat at the table eating pancakes with strawberry topping. Mom, we need to talk. I need to know. I can't live like this anymore. I keep having nightmares. Peter's eyes pleaded with his mother. Anne looked down at her coffee cup in her hand and then looked back up at him. Call your dad. An hour later, Thomas picked them up in Anne's van. Shiloh had agreed to watch the twins, so Anne could go along too. The three of them headed to the church to meet with Father Raymond. I have to know who my birth parents are. I need their help. I would think if they knew I was desperate for a kidney, they would have to help me. I just need a name, anything. I would even pay them. I have money, lots of it. Peter's mind raced as they drove. Thomas parked the van, and Peter bolted out towards the rectory. His parents jogged to keep up. "Peter, take it easy, please," Anne said as she followed behind him with his cane. Peter ignored her and was already walking through the door. Jeannie, the church secretary, was in her office and greeted them. "Hi, Father's in the meeting room over there. He's expecting you." Peter busted through the door and then stopped dead in his tracks. His face fell and tightened. In the boardroom sat Father Raymond as expected, but next to him was the face of someone who tormented him his whole life. The goat woman. Older now, and practically hunched over, her green eyes confirmed it was definitely her. In a trance, Peter shook his head back and forth as he inched back towards the door, not letting his eyes off her. Something magnetic in her pulled him toward her. "No, no, no," Peter repeated over as he continued to ease back towards the exit door. "Peter, calm down. Do you need to sit? Tom, get him a chair." "I'm not sitting," Peter snapped. "You're not well, son. Sit for a minute." "Why is she here?" Peter pointed, his eyes locked on her. Father Raymond spoke up. "I asked her to come here to help explain your adoption." No, Peter insisted. "You're not going to tell me she's my birth mom. All my life you have haunted me. What did I ever do to you?" He pivoted, looking back at his parents. He continued, "Are you people really going to bring me in here and tell me she's my mother?" Anger surged in his veins. He wanted answers, but nobody dared speak, until finally a voice he had heard only in his dreams meekly said, "Peter, I know you're scared of me. Please stay and let me explain." The goat woman pleaded, her voice so innocent and feminine sounding it seemed fake. Peter's curiosity coerced him to stay. "You have 1 minute." Peter glared back at her, but his eyes periodically darted toward the exit. The goat woman looked to Father and then to Anne before speaking. "My name's Sarah. I live in—" "You know I know where you live," Peter interrupted. She looked down at her hands folded in front of her on the table and continued. "I know you saw me through the window that night. I don't know exactly what you saw, but I know you saw me and it scared you." She looked up again. "What I saw? I saw you washing blood off your hands and trying to dispose of bloody sheets," Peter blurted out as he shook from the memory. "What?" Anne asked, looking to Thomas and then back to Peter. "What are you talking about, Peter?" Ignoring his mom, Peter nodded to Sarah. "Go on. You have 30 seconds left." "Okay, so I work with the church. I'm a nun." Peter snorted. "A nun? You don't look like a nun." "I don't wear my habit because I have a different mission here, and I don't want to draw attention to it. I came here a little over 20 years ago to help do outreach work for pregnancy crisis situations." She paused, looked to Anne, and asked, "How much do you want me to say?" Thomas took the cue and slowly started to speak. "Peter, what you are about to hear is really grueling. We never meant to lie to you, but only to protect you. I can't explain what happened back then. I have wrestled with the what-ifs your whole life. The only thing have come to know is sometimes events line up perfectly like the stars in a constellation for a reason, and it's done by God's design. There were no accidents that day." "You're not making any sense, Dad. Don't speak so vaguely. Just tell me the truth," Peter interrupted. "I will. Let me start at the beginning, but Sit down first." Peter reluctantly sat, and Thomas took a seat across from Peter, and Anne sat next to him. Thomas went on. "The day you were born, I was working overnight at the hospital. The church had just started their medical outreach program to the Indian reservations. They had this older ambulance donated to them, and we stocked it with medical supplies. 2 times a month, we drove it to the reservation to perform free medical services. Sometimes we had a dentist with us or some nurses. The details of how we ran the program back then were very rough and all volunteer. I was the only doctor who took the time to go, so it was busy for me. I never had the option of skipping a visit because without a doctor on the truck, we couldn't officially call it a medical mission. Usually, Father would try to come help with spiritual counseling. We took all the help we could get." Thomas paused. Anne spoke next. "Your father usually had a nurse help him, but that day there wasn't anyone available. He was exhausted from working all night and in no position to drive, but he couldn't call in sick. I volunteered to go with him to drive so he could nap on the way down. I know how to take someone's blood pressure and help with forms. Your father told me I should meet everyone across the street at the clinic where Sarah had the mission truck waiting for us." Anne looked at Father, who began his recollection. "The plan had been for me to pick everyone up, but I got called to do some other crisis counseling. I knew Sarah was on her way over to the clinic, so I asked her to take the truck and if she could go in my place to help with counseling. I was still going to try to make it, but I didn't want to hold up the show." Father looked to Sarah, who continued. "Every Friday, I went to the clinic to pray. It used to be an abortion clinic, but there was never a local abortionist. They had one fly in every Friday from down south. They couldn't perform the abortions in the hospital because it was a Christian hospital, so the clinic was located right next to the hospital in case emergency care was ever needed after a procedure. It was a hot day and sort of slow. The regular nurse didn't show up, so they had a new travel nurse who I didn't know." She paused, looked to Anne, who looked at Peter. Peter was silent, waiting for the point of this long, drawn-out story as Anne continued. "I arrived and saw Sarah praying. She said a woman had gone in for an operation. It made me sad, so I started to pray too. Your father showed up at the same time as Father Raymond." Thomas interjected. "I knew since they were both praying that someone was inside, and I knew your mother or Sarah wouldn't want to leave yet." A couple minutes passed. The back door opened, and the nurse came out. She was... Thomas stopped. "It was..." He shook his head. Father spoke and summarized the next events as best he could. "Peter, she had a garbage bag. She looked at us and said, 'If you believe in God, ask him what he wants you to do about this one. He's alive.' She set the bag on the trash can and went inside." Everyone watched Peter. No one wanted to go into further details. Peter shook his head. He had to hear the words to believe it. "Then, what happened?" Thomas spoke. "Inside the garbage bag was a baby, a fully developed one, struggling to get air. It was you." Thomas looked at Peter, who had a deer-in-the-headlights expression on his face. "Your mother tried to abort you by a saline abortion, but you obviously came out alive. Severely burned, but alive. You couldn't breathe on your own, so I cleaned out your airway and grabbed a ventilator out of the truck." Thomas rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know what you're saying," Peter said. His breathing was heavy, and he was dizzy, This is so messed up. I wanted to run into the hospital and grab a whole team of doctors to help save you, but I knew it would backfire because you were supposed to be dead. Normally, when an abortion fails, the abortionist will finish the job. Occasionally, a baby survives an abortion, and the doctor must sign the birth certificate. I knew, since your mother's doctor made the nurse take you away, that he was not a doctor who was going to sign your birth certificate or be glad we tried to redeem you. Thomas grimaced and continued. You can stop me any time. You don't need to hear all this. Peter felt hollow now. He was past the point of shock. He was numb. He needed to know. Go on. We didn't want anyone to see you, so we piled into the mission truck. I examined you, and you were perfect. Beautiful. You were fighting to live. I learned in medical school that the best incubator is a mother's chest. Her chest will raise its temperature to heat her baby, so to help warm you, Anne held you. I could see by the look on her face that she bonded with you instantly. Anne spoke again. I held you, and it seemed like you were getting stronger. We had to make a decision. Anne tried to grab Peter's hand, but he jerked it away. Peter, do you understand now? Peter was stunned. All his childhood truths, as he had known them, were gone. I'm living a life full of lies. No, I don't. Then what happened? Thomas continued. We had minimal supplies on the truck to clean you up and clot your burns. We all pledged to do what we could to save you, and that meant keeping a secret and even fabricating some lies. We had one major problem, though. What? Peter asked. We couldn't let anyone know where you came from because we could go to jail for kidnapping. We had to find a place to keep you safe and come up with a believable backstory. We couldn't take you to our house because we had nosy kids. Father couldn't care for you in the church either, so Sarah volunteered her little cabin. I took you home with me, Sarah confirmed. Peter rubbed his forehead, hoping it would help him to hear her words differently. He glared at his mom. How could you keep this from me? You knew I was terrified of her. Anne looked to the floor. Peter, what choice did I have? It wouldn't have made sense to tell you one part without telling you everything. I was always going to tell you, but when the timing was better. Anne's voice squeaked. Sarah cleared her throat to speak again. I took you home with me to live in my cabin. You needed to be fed, and formula wasn't going to work for your premature digestive system. Your mom was pumping breast milk and would even come to nurse you, but I needed something to supplement it. Goat's milk has long been known to have the closest properties to human milk, and with a little extra vitamin supplementation, it works well once you dilute it. I got a couple of milking goats, so I had fresh milk for you. You gave me goat's milk? Peter interrupted. Nodding her head, Sarah continued. So people started calling me the goat woman because I had goats at my house. The goats I had were all because of you. I told people I was using the milk to make and sell soap to support my mission. Peter looked up to the ceiling in disbelief, but Sarah continued. So, before all this happened, children would always play around my cabin. They loved rolling on the hill on sunny days, and I always spoiled them with treats. It got worse when I got the goats. Whole families would congregate on my hill after church to pet and feed the goats. I had to do something to make sure the kids didn't see anything or hear your cries. We couldn't let anyone have even a tiny clue about what was going on. So I made up scary stories to tell the kids in the area so they would stay away from my house. I made sure every kid knew the stories. And it worked. So all the stories you probably have heard about the goat woman, I made them up to protect you.
Stop.
Peter held up his hand.
I need to think. You're telling me I wasn't even adopted, but you stole me from the trash.
He winced as he spoke. You're a survivor, Peter. I know it sounds hard to believe. Why do you think we couldn't tell you when you were little? Anne pleaded as she tried to grab Peter's hand again, but he shook her off. It's the truth. I swear. It kills me to have to tell you this.
So then what? Did you just bring me home one day?
Anne spoke. Sort of. We knew you were premature, so your dad and I agreed I would wear a pregnancy pillow for a while to show I was carrying a baby. We waited for you to get stronger. We had no idea if you were going to make it. We just took everything one day at a time. Thomas spoke again. When I determined you were strong enough to come home, we told people your mom went into labor, and it went so fast she delivered right at home. It was pretty simple. I filled out the paperwork for a birth certificate, just like I would if she had delivered in the hospital. If it had been anyone else, they would have required to show us a placenta from a home birth. Everyone trusted us because they saw she had been pregnant. Then we took you home. Anne reached for Peter's hand again, and this time he let her take it. Please forgive us. We didn't know what to do. We just wanted to love you as long as you were here, so you would not be afraid. We received the biggest blessing of all. You. Peter's brain was throbbing. This pull I have with the goat woman was because I really did have a connection to her. She raised me when I was a baby. Why couldn't you just go back and tell the doctors I was alive? Don't you take an oath as a doctor to protect life? There are no protection laws for something like this. Your birth mother signed the papers to abort you, so that is what the doctor was required to do. For us to keep you alive was a crime. Really, the travel nurse saved your life because she didn't do her job to correct the error. Sarah spoke. I always felt protective of you. I've watched over you. I know you saw me watching you a few times and it scared you. I never meant to scare you. I just have always loved you from a distance. Peter placed his hands on the sides of his head and pushed on his temples to stop a stress headache from coming on. This is all beyond messed up. I can't even believe it. Thomas spoke again. Peter, as you started to grow, we saw some issues. We took you to specialists when you were around the age of 1. He diagnosed you with cerebral palsy. You know about your disability, but what you don't know is that doctors determined it was caused by the lack of oxygen to your brain at birth. Your disability is because of the procedure. I always wondered why I had to be different. I swore it was God's punishment for something I did, Peter said, and he started to cry. Time passed, and he cried harder. Pulling himself together, he faced his parents to ask the one question no one wanted to answer. So you're telling me that you don't know who my birth mother is? She doesn't even know I'm alive. She thinks she already killed me and there's no kidney for me? Matching eyes with his dad, Thomas couldn't answer. Thomas stood up and grabbed his son in an embrace, and Anne met them both as they cried together. Chapter 25. Peter emotionally detached that night. I can't care anymore. This life has been lived. He sat at his newly gifted piano in his dark garage, with only a few candles glowing on top so he could see the keys. Peter played the Goat Woman song he knew from memory over and over. Hours passed, and Peter played. Anne walked in with a sandwich and cold lemonade, his favorite drink, but he never looked up. To Anne, it appeared Peter made every effort to specifically ignore her. She laid the sandwich on the piano, squeezed his shoulder, and left him alone. But it killed her to be disconnected from him. An alarm beeped on Peter's phone. He silenced the ringer. Dialysis appointment. No point in doing that anymore. I'm never getting a kidney. I'm not dragging out this misery. The door creaked as it opened. It was dark outside. No light crept in through the door to help Peter steal a glimpse of who was coming into his garage, but he really didn't care. There's 0 point in caring about anything when it's all going to be over soon. Footsteps stopped behind him. I don't know what that smell is. It's sweet, like fresh rain. He looked up and jumped to his feet when he saw it was the goat woman. Sarah, as he now knew her, was standing behind him. Sarah, you scared me to death. You know I'm not used to thinking of you as a normal person. Peter held his chest. Sorry, your mom said you were back here, but I already knew. I've watched you play down here a lot of nights. Now you openly admit to stalking me? That's creepy. Peter stepped back. I've watched you only in a way a mother watches her child, but I never wanted to get caught. She smiled. So now you're just going to come right in and hang out? No, I'm here because I have something for you. I mean, I don't have it here right now, but we can go get it. It should help you. Go get what now? It's sort of a secret, and your parents don't even know about it. I was hoping we could sneak out and be back in an hour or so. I have my car out front. Come ride with me. You do know up until a few hours ago I was terrified of you. Now I'm supposed to get in a car with you without even telling my parents. Well, do you think they would let you go in your condition? Good point. Where are we going? Peter grabbed his sweatshirt that he had draped over the piano bench. We're going to my cabin, but then take a walk to find something. You can say no, but I think you'll want to see it. Peter thought for a second. I don't really have anything to lose. Okay, why not? He slipped his sweatshirt over his head and blew out the candles on the piano. Smoke lingered in a stream that captured both of their attentions. After a few moments of watching the smoke dissipate, they left in silence. Sarah drove to her house. I didn't forget about this, but I just needed you to have some time to process what you were hearing this morning. It was a lot to hear, wasn't it? Yeah, it was a little much. Peter couldn't mask the pain in his voice. Sarah thumped her fingers on the steering wheel. Your parents love you so much. I think they just did the best they could with what they had. She turned the car into the parking lot area in front of her cabin, shut it off, and opened her door. She motioned for Peter to get out. Sliding his foot out the door, Peter kicked something on the floorboard, and it fell out onto the ground. He leaned over to retrieve it, and he recognized it immediately. It was a copy of his Goat Woman CD, his first single, released almost 8 years ago when he was only 10 years old. Blushing, Sarah grabbed it back. Sorry, I'm not the neatest person, especially in my car. I could never resist a Goat Woman CD. A sly smile crept on her face as she chucked the CD case back into the car and shut the door. Peter looked at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. She looked embarrassed. Are you strong enough to follow me on foot, or should we go grab Father's four-wheeler? She asked, wanting to change the subject. Yeah, I can walk. Do you need your cane? Peter glanced sideways at Sarah. You would know I use a cane. He kicked the dirt beneath his feet. I know this walking path. It's steep, but
I really don't care about my health, not anymore. I don't need it, Peter said, and then took off ahead of her up the hill. They hiked slowly to allow Peter to pace himself.
Can I ask you something? Sarah asked.
Sure.
I know that when you were little, you believed all the legends of the goat woman stuff the other kids told you, but you had to stop believing it at some point. I mean, it was like Santa Claus. How come you were still afraid of me? Peter chewed his bottom lip as he thought about her question.
I guess it probably has to do with the whole bloody sheets episode I saw at your cabin. What were you doing?
Peter looked sideways at her. Perfect timing for your question, as I'm about to show you. They reached the peak of the hill and started to go into the wooded area. Near an opening into a path was a huge tree trunk with a shovel leaning against it. Peter reached the stump first and leaned on it to rest.
I really overestimated my strength.
Sarah reached the stump, grabbed the shovel, and kept walking. Peter traipsed behind her. Sarah carried a little flashlight she had grabbed out of her car, and it was just enough to light their path. They reached the end of the trail, and there was a large brown rock. Sarah threw the shovel down, propped her hands on the rock, and leaned her whole body into it.
Are you trying to move that? It's half your size.
Yeah, can you help me? Dead serious and fixed on the task at hand, she didn't look up. Peter leaned over onto the rock, and they pushed together.
Maybe we can roll it. I can put the shovel underneath it and try to lift it a little.
Okay, here, let me do that, Sarah said as she grabbed the shovel, and the two of them rolled the rock the tiniest inkling over, so that the ground it had been resting on was now exposed. Sarah stood up straight to catch her breath. She regained her composure and began to dig into the ground.
Are we looking for buried treasure?
Peter raised an eyebrow. To you, this will be better than gold, she said as she dug a rather large hole into the ground. Her shovel hit something. She bent over, brushed the dirt off with her hands, and wiggled it out of the dirt as Peter shone the flashlight on it.
It's a wooden box,
Peter said.
I've seen that before.
It was identical to the one Sarah had on her counter the night he looked in her window. Sarah brushed off the last of the dirt and pushed the box towards Peter.
Open it. Are you nuts? Should I even get my fingerprints on this? I am not getting sucked into your crime scene.
Peter's eyes squinted with suspicion.
Open it. Here, give me the flashlight, and I'll help you see what's in here,
Sarah said as they traded possessions.
What is it?
Peter was hesitant to open it. He played with the edge of the lid, afraid to open the box. It's your future. Sarah held his gaze.
My future of being buried in a wooden box? Thanks for the encouragement.
Open it, Sarah repeated as she shined the light on the box lid. Peter glided the lid off and peered inside. Rolling around in the bottom of the box were 2 orange bottles with white lids, like prescription bottles. Peter picked one up. The label was faded and hard to read. However, he could make it out. Zoloft. He arched his eyebrow.
You think I'm depressed?
Sarah covered Peter's hand as she held the bottle. She clasped the bottle between her thumb and her index finger and rotated the bottle just slightly.
Now read it, she urged.
Take 1 pill every 24 hours. I can't see the rest of it, and over here it says Elizabeth Juergens. Peter shrugged his shoulders. What's the point of this? Sarah placed her finger so it held onto the word. Elizabeth. That's her.
Who?
Your mother. All Peter heard was white noise.
What?
That's your mother's name.
My mother's Elizabeth Juergens. How do you know?
His chest tightened as he spoke. Yeah, it's crazy, I know. Here, first sit down. This will take a while. Sarah leaned against the rock and motioned for Peter to rest next to her. Peter timidly leaned onto the rock. "It does feel good to sit." Sarah looked up. The night sky was black and clear with stars hovering over them. Peter followed her gaze and focused on the stars. "Their stillness is overwhelming. In a world that never slows, everything is frozen up there. I bet if they looked down at us, they would get dizzy from our tempo." "So, Peter, do you remember when your dad said the nurse came out with the garbage bag?" Peter nodded. "It was a garbage bag. There was garbage in the bag, too. Your father handed it to me and told me to get rid of it. Something told me to look inside first. There wasn't much there, but somehow, in the bottom, I found these bottles." "So you found trash. How do you know it belonged to my mother?" "I didn't at first, but I just had this gut feeling. I mean, I knew it came from her room. I'm not going to say any more because this is your journey, but Peter, I've been watching over you throughout your whole life. I've seen this play out. God has really been working in your life. It's her. I know it is." Peter was no longer able to read her name because tears blurred it, but he didn't need to read it. He had his mother's name burned into his memory forever. "So you buried it out here under a rock?" "That's another long story. I didn't know what to do with it. I kept it in a shoebox in my house for a long time, but it sort of crept me out. But then something happened. Father became obsessed with checking the garbage bags from the clinic. Every time they did an abortion, the trash would come out of the room. He had to know what happened to the baby. He just couldn't forget about it. I think once you find one alive, you can't dismiss it. We never found another baby, of course, but we always found something pointing to one, whether it was a mother's ID bracelet or medical instructions, etc. We just didn't know what to do with the clues, and it seemed so callous just to throw the stuff away. It was usually all that was left to represent an entire life. Over time, as Father was dumpster diving, he made friends with the nursing director. He found out they usually sent the babies to be harvested for body parts, which was illegal." "What? That's disgusting." Sarah continued. "It's sad. That's what it really is. Upon doing more research, we found there was a whole ring of doctors that did this sort of thing, and everyone on the inside was told to lie about it. Father tried to report the doctor, but no one took him serious. Eventually, the abortionist made some sort of a deal that I don't even know the details of, but I know in the end they said Father could have the babies. He couldn't stand thinking that the babies never had proper burials. It really became his mission in life to make sure they were laid to rest." Sarah stood up, walked closer to the edge of the hill, still looking over the trees. She motioned for Peter to join her. Peter wobbled over to the ledge and looked out, too, not sure of what he was looking for. "He brings the babies up here, and together we bury them. We knew we couldn't go around digging holes in the ground all the time without people getting suspicious. To conceal the grave sites, we plant trees over them." Her voice trailed off. She paused for a moment, and then she continued. "Here they are. We call it our cherub garden." Peter looked out into the sea of evergreens. It went out past the skyline and appeared to be never-ending. "There have to be hundreds, if not thousands. It's a whole forest." 2027. We've been working this mission for almost 18 years. It adds up, you know. To me, the trees are a visual reminder of what we have lost. "There were 2,027 abortions here in the last 18 years? Peter asked in disbelief. 2028. One got away. Sarah winked at Peter. So, after we started this memorial project, I still had your box of stuff. I couldn't throw it away because I just had this gut feeling. Something told me you might need it someday. You were special, though. We didn't give you a tree because you got to live. So you got this rock. This makes me sick. Peter covered his mouth as his chin quivered. Why would you guys do all this and have all these secrets? How could we not do it? This has been my mission so long, I don't even know what other people do. Father Raymond and I will probably be doing this until we die. We just can't stop checking the garbage. I was always told these trees were planted for the Christmas wreath project. You're telling me these trees are holes you made because they're grave sites? Yes. The Christmas wreath project is just a secondary use of the trees, sort of a cover-up. We have to buy the trees. The budget committee was starting to get suspicious why we needed so many, so we came up with the fundraiser idea. Now it more than pays for itself and further funds my mission here. Peter watched the wind dance in the trees, inhaling the cool summer breeze, pine scent filling his lungs. How could something so beautiful and strong like a tree be symbolic of something so not? Do you think if people could see it, it would be different? Sarah shook her head and folded her lips in tight. Over 58 million babies just in our country. I don't think we could make a forest that big. It does seem like it's one of those things that people accept because they've been taught to accept it without actually looking at it. Sarah bit her lip. So, Elizabeth Juergens, you need to Google her. Let's get out of here so we can get some cell phone service. Peter was shocked by how fast he forgot. He had astounding news and work to do. He hustled back to the car and started searching for Elizabeth Juergens on his phone. There are at least 100 Elizabeth Juergenses, but none in this area except a few old addresses from 20 years ago. She must have moved out of the area. What if she got married and changed her name? There has to be a way to narrow it down. We need to find a middle initial. Tomorrow, we should go request birth records for any in this area to see what her middle initial is to narrow it down. I can help you. Thank you. Peter looked at Sarah, and for the first time, he felt no fear. He felt the mother's love she had always had for him. Sarah felt the connection too. It was a connection she had longed for many years. You're welcome. Chapter 26. The next morning, Peter decided to make up his missed dialysis appointment. He watched his blood filter out of his arm through a tube. This really puts the frailty of life on display. A text message beeped on his phone. Are you up? It was Sarah. Yeah, I had to get my blood sucked out this morning. Smiley face. How long does that take? IDK. Hey, how did you get this number? LOL, I have my ways. Peter scratched his head, wondering about Sarah's resourcefulness. So, what are you up to? Peter texted. I found her. Peter called her. His chest pounded. Hey, you found Elizabeth? How? I'm a nun. I have some advantages. I looked in the church archives for a baptism record. I thought, this is such a small community, and maybe she belonged to our church at some time, and bingo. I found someone who would be about that age, and her middle name was Catherine. I didn't see any marriage records, though, so I did some more digging. I called the post office. Apparently, there's an Elizabeth C. Juergens who just registered with the post office, She must have moved recently. I have an address." "No kidding. You have an address." Peter stretched his neck out to look for a nurse to come pull his dialysis cord out of him. "I sort of have a better place to be, lady." He waved a nurse down in the hall. She smiled and then continued to type on her computer. Peter winced with impatience. "Yeah, and I would think it's current. Do you want me to pick you up, or should I give you the address?" "Just give me the address." 892 Swan Lane. Peter knew that area of town as it was the most affluent neighborhood, which made his heart sink a little. She's probably a rich snob. "Thanks. I'll let you know how it goes." "Good luck. Bye." Another 30 minutes passed before the nurse had Peter ready to leave. Not knowing if it was hospital policy or just his parents' policy, he was told not to drive after dialysis, so he had to wait for a ride. Anne was parked in the handicap spot right out front. Peter had a somber expression on his face when he climbed into the van. Anne picked it up right away. "What happened? Are you dizzy? Put your head down a bit." "No, Mom, I'm not dizzy. I have something to tell you. I wanted to tell you this morning, but everyone else was there. Last night, Sarah came to visit me." "I knew that." "She told me she had something for me, and we went to her cabin." "You left?" "I did. She gave me this box, and in it were some pills with a name on it. She apparently took it out of the trash bag where you found me, and she thinks the pills were my birth mom's. There's a name on the bottle. Sarah did some research, and she texted me with an address. And so we found her, Mom. We found my birth mom." Peter blurted it out, not believing it himself. "How? I mean, you just told me how, but she had these pills this whole time?" Peter pulled the bottle out of his pocket and gave it to his mom. She rolled it over slowly, reading it. She covered her mouth with one hand. "Oh, wow, Peter. What if this is her? It's a miracle." "Don't get your hopes up. I still don't know what I want to say to her. What if she denies she had an abortion? How do I even bring it up?" "I don't know what to say. If it were me, I would be excited to see you. Maybe you shouldn't mention the kidney right away. Maybe just tell her who you are and see how that goes." "No, duh, Mom. I'm not going to ask her for a kidney. I know what not to say, but really, what do I say? I can't just say, 'I know you had an abortion and it's me and I'm alive. Surprise!'" "Okay, let's stop being sarcastic here. Let's practice. I'll be her and you be you and be real." "No, I'm not doing that. It's dumb, Mom. This is serious. There's no way anyone could walk up to someone and start talking about this stuff." "What if you went there to introduce yourself so you can see who she is? If she's nice and if it feels right, you could hand her a letter explaining everything." "A letter? Yeah, that's perfect. Do you want to help me write it?" "Yeah, I can. When do you want to work on it?" "Now, Mom. I don't have time. I need to do this all yesterday." "Okay. Here, look in the back seat. I have some notebooks back there from the twins. I'll rip out those first color pages. Here's a good page." Anne narrated as she handed Peter the notebook. "I have a pen in my purse, too." Anne dug into her purse, pulled out a fountain pen, and handed it to Peter. "What should I write, Mom?" Peter stared at the blank page. "How about, 'Dear Elizabeth Juergens'?" Peter glared at his mom. "Wow, that's original. Okay, I have it from here. Dear Elizabeth, my name is Peter Arnold. I grew up here in Mara Gap and had the best family. I recently found out I had been adopted and there were complications to my adoption. It was not a legal adoption. My parents found me in the trash can at Cedar Clinic on July 3rd, 17 years ago, the result of an unsuccessful abortion.
I have been in touch with one of the witnesses that was there, and she has reason to believe you are the woman who had the procedure. I'm reaching out to you today only because I want to know you. I'm not angry. I have had the best life and best family. I understand this is shocking, so please take some time to think about it and call me at the number on the bottom if you care to talk further. Thanks kindly, Peter Arnold. How does that sound? Corny?
I think no matter what you write, it's going to sound weird because the situation's weird. They nodded in agreement to each other. Now what? Do you want to mail it?
No, Mom. I want to take it there now. I can't risk mailing it and her not getting it, and then I'll never know.
Okay, we can go there now. I just want to make sure that you're ready. This happened fast. Anne grabbed Peter's hand. I mean it. Are you ready for this? It could turn out badly. You're going to bombard her with this. Be prepared.
I know what you're saying, Mom. I get it.
Peter looked out his window.
But I have to try.
Anne cranked the key to start the van, reversed it, and drove across town. Peter watched the houses pass outside his window. The closer they got, the bigger the houses became. Anne pulled up to the curb and stopped in front of a stucco French country-style house with the matching address. She turned to Peter. She said, "This is your moment. You make sure you're ready. We can sit here as long as you need."
I can't wait any longer, Peter said as he pulled the handle back on the door to open it.
I'll be right here waiting for you. Anne reached over to hug her son. I love you, Peter. And know, however this goes, you are loved by me. Anne said with a reassuring smile, but her insides were twisting, begging Elizabeth not to break her son's heart. Peter slid out of the van and walked up the sidewalk. A beautiful weeping willow shaded the driveway on one side, creating a shadow on the house. His heart pounded. He was excited and scared, but nervous and hopeful. He reached the steps. He knocked on the door. He heard footsteps.
Breathe. Don't forget to talk when you see her.
Licking his lips to keep his mouth from sticking shut, he shifted back on his feet. He reached out and placed a hand on the wall to brace himself. With his other hand, he touched his pocket for the letter. It was there.
I can do this.
The door swung open wide, and he could see inside. A face moved closer to the screen door, and as it moved, Peter captured it like a picture he had seen 1,000,000 times. He knew every line of her smile, every twinkle of her brilliant blue eyes, for he had seen them 1,000 times. All the fear he had before knocking was gone the moment he laid eyes on her. Out of the now open door, she spoke in the beautiful voice Peter loved. "Peter, how did you find me?" For the voice belonged to none other than Peter's beloved, Exa Scarletta. The end. This has been Ruby in the Water, written by J.P. Sterling, narrated by Rachel Brandt. Copyright 2017 by J.P. Sterling. Production copyright 2017 by J.P. Sterling.